Welcome to the webinar. My name is Alton Spencer. I'm a Community Development Specialist with the National Indian Child Welfare Association. And before I start, I'd just like to remind everybody that there will be a survey at the end of the webinar, and we'd like to encourage you to take that survey. If you could just dedicate a couple minutes to that, it'd be greatly appreciated. So, like I said, my name is Alton Spencer. I'm with the National Indian Child Welfare Association, or NICWA. And I'm joined by Vicki Wolf, who is the program coordinator at NICWA, and she will be helping to facilitate this webinar. I'd like to thank Barb Gladue, the family engagement specialist at NICWA, for her role in helping develop the slides for this webinar. So the title of this webinar is The History of Indigenous Storytelling, and we might want to add to that title, Connecting the Past and the Present. So this webinar is the first in a three-part series, and it provides an introduction to the Native American legacy of storytelling. The webinar will show how tribes use storytelling as a way to pass down indigenous traditions to their members, why storytelling is so vital to tribal people, and the different types of stories that are told. There are two other webinars in this series that will be presented at a later date. The second is called The Value of Traditional Storytelling as a Part of Parenting, and the third one will be Tribal Storytelling. We don't have dates for those set yet, but we will get that information out to you as soon as possible. I also want to quickly thank Tiara for offering a lot of support with the technical assistance here for technical support for the webinar. She's from the Training Institute. And so, thanks everyone for joining the webinar. I'd like to see if we could get people to share where they're from, what community, city, town, or state. I see we got some responses so far. Jenna, Eric, Tristan have made some comments. But if you'd like to, identify your tribal affiliation, if you do have that, that would be wonderful. And I also want to mention that at any point during this webinar, if you have any thoughts or questions that you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to post, and we will read those aloud as soon as we get a chance to pause. So I just want to just take a couple minutes to see if individuals would be willing to introduce themselves real quickly and just share a little bit of information about where they are now and what tribe they're affiliated with, if they are affiliated with one. We have Bagarath, Sofia, welcome, from New Hampshire and Montana, respectively. And Melanie, thank you, in the Pacific Northwest. Janice from Phoenix, all right. Danielle, welcome to the webinar, and Danielle is from the University of Washington, Turtle Mountain, Bend, Chippewa. Janice, welcome. And Janelle, from all the way in Helena, Montana, also from the tribe of Chippewa Indians. And I see that Tristan, one of our NICWA staff, is typing in. Glad she could join us. So go ahead and continue to type in, and I'm going to actually get started. And I would like to actually begin by sharing a short story. This is a story about the birth of Nana Buju from the Ojibwe tradition. An elderly woman lived with her daughter in a small home in the woodland country. The old woman warned her daughter not to sit facing the west. One day, when the sun was warm and shining bright, her daughter forgot her mother's warning and went outside and sat facing west. Suddenly, she felt the cool west breeze chill her body. She ran to tell her mother what had happened. "You should have listened to me," said her mother. Soon, the daughter became ill. Before she died, she dripped blood onto a piece of bark that was in the room. The old lady put her daughter to rest and placed the bark aside. One day she looked at the bark and found that the drop of blood on the bark had begun to grow. She watched it grow until it grew into a baby. "What is happening?" she asked. "Oh, Nokomis, do you know me?" asked the baby. "I am your grandson, Nana Buju." And so, at the onset here, I want to emphasize that there are hundreds of tribes in the region that we now refer to as the lower 48 in Alaska. And each tribe has their own unique customs, protocols, and traditional practices, and their own unique tradition with storytelling. The information being shared in this webinar does not represent all tribes, and it doesn't represent one specific tribe. Storytelling is an incredibly rich, multifaceted, and diverse tradition among Native American peoples, and it continues to be a foundation for understanding tribal culture. Each tribe, as I mentioned, has their own unique storytelling traditions with their own stories, their own unique meaning that they assign to stories, unique values and teachings that are embedded within these stories. And in addition, the uses of storytelling and storytelling practices differ greatly among tribes. Although there are instances where there are commonalities between indigenous storytelling traditions, for example, many tribes have a trickster character who teaches important lessons in life. Key differences often remain with respect to how these trickster stories are interpreted, how characters are described, the types of lessons that are being taught, when and how the stories are told, and even in the stories themselves. A quick illustration of this is that among the Anishinaabe tribes, which include Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Menominee people, among others, the trickster character is Nana Buju. In some stories, Nana Buju is an only child. In some, he has a twin brother. And in others, he is the eldest of 4 brothers. So stories about Nana Buju vary from community to community. And I should also add that with respect to storytelling, traditional storytelling in general, even within a specific tribe, families or clans may tell stories in different ways. So I just want to emphasize the diversity that does exist in the storytelling traditions among Native peoples. I learned about Nana Buju from my coworker who is Ojibwe, and that's why I decided to include the story I just told, and there's another story that I'll share also about Nana Buju. So, it's very important to understand that there are 567 federally recognized tribes and another 460 unrecognized tribes, and each has their own stories and their own storytelling traditions. And as I mentioned, there is often storytelling diversity within a tribe. So again, the information presented in this webinar is based on information that reflects a general perspective. So oral traditions of Native American storytelling. Traditionally, spoken word was the mode used by tribes to teach their young the ways of the people. Tribal stories contain the collective wisdom of a people and have been traditionally used to pass on customs, values, rituals, history, skills, and culture. They are central to Native American heritage and traditional teachings and have been used to convey educational, moral, and spiritual lessons for millennia. In many ways, they actually represent a living religion that is passed down from generation to generation. So storytelling plays many important roles within the tribe and has played this important role for thousands of years. As I mentioned, traditional stories are multifaceted by nature. So while they are often used to transmit vital lessons about survival, parenting, one's place in the world, and healthy behavior, for example, they're also intended to be sources of entertainment for children, youth, families, and all members of the community. They're also very dynamic in that they can be interpreted on multiple levels. And so this allows the listener to understand them in different ways and to use them as catalysts for their own personal revelation. So there's no written culture among tribes historically, and so they relied on the oral culture of storytelling. And so as you may guess, language is the key aspect of traditional Native American storytelling. Although in modern times, traditional stories are often told in English, there is a big difference between telling a story in English versus telling it in a tribal language. In tribal language, there is a vividness of imagery, an implicit perspective of reality, a certain connectedness, and an emotional impact that can't necessarily be captured in English. And sometimes tribal languages can't be translated into English. But nevertheless, even in translation, Native American storytelling contains the wisdom of the tribal culture. And I just want to just make a couple comments on what I meant by implicit perspective of reality, because so much of how people understand the world around them and their worldview and how they perceive reality is embedded within the language. So in a tribal worldview, nature is animated. It is imbued with spirit. It's very alive. The earthly and the spiritual intersect fluidly. These realms are not necessarily separated. And it's also been said that the Native perspective of reality is verbing as opposed to nouning. And what I mean by that is it's in motion. Reality of life is in motion. It's fluid. It's not static like a noun. It's in motion as we think of as verbs. So the oral tradition of storytelling brings with it an intimacy and a respect for ancestors and for the storyteller. As the story is being told, the audience is expected to listen attentively out of respect from the beginning of the story to the end, and to learn the story so that they can be passed on. And as you see in the image on this slide, there's a storyteller who appears to be an elder, and he's surrounded by attentive younger people. And in this image, we can get a sense of the role that storytelling plays in teaching and relationship in the tribal community. So storytelling has always been crucial to the survival of tribes because it included passing down the cultural knowledge of the community. So traditionally, it played a vital role in helping tribal members learn skills, understand how to be a good member of the tribe, how to learn how to live a healthy and balanced life, and even how to be in relationship with the supernatural. Storytelling has always promoted and supported mental health and wellness and motivated tribal members to adopt healthy traditional lifestyles. And, in modern times, traditional storytelling is being used not only to preserve culture and revitalize language, but also as a vehicle to inspire wellness and help-seeking behavior. One of the links in the sidebar is to an article from 2002 on the use of traditional storytelling to promote health and wellness. And you see also the link at the bottom of this slide, but it's available. It's an interesting article, and What it does is it describes a program that combined talking circles and storytelling. And groups would meet in culturally appropriate settings, and these groups were facilitated by trained community members. And specific stories would be used to, during the talking circle, would be used to address areas such as wellness, healthy relationships, prevention, understanding high-risk behaviors, keeping fit physically, learning about traditional native foods, and destigmatizing help-seeking behavior, among other topics. Traditional Native American stories are great vehicles for conveying health messages because they capture the attention and interest of the audience and encourage individuals to engage in personal reflection and draw their own conclusions about how to interpret the story. They reinforce or establish positive beliefs and values. They often introduce key ideas and values in a simple, entertaining way that can be understood on many different levels, allowing the person to delve into deeper meanings that might just not be readily apparent on the surface of the story. They provide a means by which Native Americans can identify and reconnect with ancient tribal traditions, and they can be used as a great tool to create dialogue. And in addition to this, storytelling promotes healing from intergenerational and historical trauma. So what we know is that culture heals, and culture is effective prevention for youth and families. So I want to just pause for a minute and see if there are any questions or comments, thoughts that individuals in the group here would like to post and share with us on the webinar. Okay. So since there are no questions at this time, I would like to actually share another story. So this one is called Nana Buju and the Wild Geese. And also there's a link, there should be a link in the public chat section for this story as well. One day a great trickster, Nana Buju, was wandering through the woods looking for mischief when he came to the shore of a small lake. Suddenly, he heard a great commotion overhead. He looked up and saw a flock of geese. The geese were weary from their journey from the north, where they had spent the summer, and were wheeling overhead, preparing to land on the lake. Nana Buju hurried in the direction of their flight and saw the birds come to rest on the water with a great flurry and folding of wings. He thought of what a delicious feast the birds would make. But first he had to come up with a scheme to capture as many geese as possible. For if he dashed among them, he would catch only one or two. Going quickly but quietly back into the woods, he peeled off strips of cedar bark and made a long rope. Then he slipped quietly back into the water, being careful not to disturb the weary birds. He swam under them and tied their legs together with his cedar rope. At the same time, he tied each goose to the next one so that he could pull them up on shore together. At first, all went well, for Nana Buju was so cunning and swift that the geese did not notice him or know what was happening. But his greed finally got him in trouble. Instead of being happy with a few geese, he went on to tie up the whole flock. Just as he was finishing, he had to come up for air. He made such a loud whoosh that he frightened the geese. The first goose to fly up was in the middle of the rope, and all the others followed. As they rose from the lake, they formed a V because they were tied together, and Nana Buju dangled at one end. He shouted to the birds to stop, but the geese only beat the air more desperately with their strong gray wings. Just then, the birds flew over a stretch of soft, swampy ground. Nana Buju let go of the rope with a shout and landed on a bed of oozy mud. As for the geese, they continued on their way, still flying in a V shape because of the rope that joined them together. Wild geese have been flying that way ever since. as you can see if you look up in the sky, autumn sky when they are calling past. Some think they can hear a note of laughter in their cries as they mock Nana Buju for failing in his trick. It was not long before Nana Buju forgot the foolish side of his adventure. All he remembered was that he had flown through the air. He made up a song celebrating his feet, a song celebrating his feet, a song he never tired of singing. Flocks of geese up in the sky, Nana Buju flew as far and as high. The people listened respectfully to Nana Buju's song, but whenever he was out of hearing, they sang a different one. High in the autumn sky, wild geese are calling. Down from the autumn sky, Nana is falling. So I just want to ask if anybody would like to share any thoughts about this story or anything that comes to mind, any feelings that occurred, or any thoughts about trickster characters from your tribal tradition. Any names of characters that you'd be interested in sharing with the community here? Okay, well, I'll move on to the next slide then. So who are storytellers? Traditionally, storytellers play a very important role in tribal community, and they're often considered teachers and historians. In many tribes, storytellers are identified at birth, and often storytelling is passed down through lineage. So, you know, the tradition of storytellers being identified at birth is one that's common, but not representative of all tribes. In fact, the same goes with storytelling as being passed down through lineage. I spoke with a Dene tribal member. Dene is the name of the people that are commonly referred to as Navajo, and he mentioned that storytellers in his tribe are not identified at birth, but that storytellers like shaman or medicine men is a lineage that is passed down. So again, we can see some examples of just variance with the relationship that tribes have with storytelling and storytellers. So there is a big movement to revitalize storytelling, and there are quite a number of examples of this. The use of digital storytelling that is becoming popular in tribal communities. There are storytelling conferences, and there are organizations like Wisdom of the Elders in Portland, Oregon, that support cultural sustainability and storytelling traditions. So we see that there is still a vital, growing, organic, existence of the storytelling tradition that is still occurring this day. Many tribal communities also incorporate traditional storytelling at community gatherings, and this is always a very positive experience for families and youth and communities. Where do stories come from? So they come from a wide range of sources. Here are just a few. They come from ancestors. So many of the stories are incredibly steeped in history and are so ancient. It can be difficult to pinpoint a certain origin, but they go back many, many years. Stories are inspired by animals, observations of the natural world. They come from and are inspired by personal experiences. Stories are shared amongst tribes, so one tribe might hear a story from another and incorporate it into their culture, their traditions, and their teachings. I'm sure that many stories have come from visions and dreams, because stories are inherent. There's an inherent spiritual quality and dimension to Native American stories and storytelling. And they also arise out of ceremonies. So there are a lot of sources, in a lot of ways that the stories are given birth. So stories play so many different roles, and storytelling plays so many different roles. They're told year-round, but oftentimes there are particular seasons or events or ceremonies where particular stories are told. So as you can see on the slide, storytelling does happen during particular seasons. Oftentimes, the winter months were traditionally a time to hunker down and tell all the stories. Also, special events that occurred on seasonal cycles like salmon runs and harvest time were also associated with storytelling. And storytelling, is often woven through ceremonial practices like sweat lodges or Sundance ceremonies, for example. Storytelling plays a very important role in protocol. And what I mean by protocol is the proper understanding of how to behave during certain important rituals, ceremonies, or events, and refers to proper actions and proper signs of respect. With respect to protocol, there is a canoe journey that takes place in the Pacific Northwest, and stories are told and songs are sung when canoes come ashore. And I'll just mention real quickly here that singing and music is often a key part of the storytelling process. So songs being sung accompanied by drums and harmony is something that's very common. So skill building, guides for living, parts of growing up, and what these three ideas refer to as far as when our stories told, when is storytelling traditionally taking place. Storytelling is often associated with different stages of child development and maturation and coming of age. Storytelling can be related to when an individual is ready to take on new skills or new challenges. For example, making clothing, hunting and fishing, performing ceremonies, and even seeking supernatural guidance. Puberty would be another example that where there would be storytelling associated with this experience, and perhaps even preparing an individual for this type of experience. Now just pause for a moment to see if there are any questions or comments at this point. Okay, so this slide is really addressing the values of stories. And so, as I've kind of covered a bit before, the storytelling experience and stories often portray and relay guides for living for the community, and that's often why it's so essential for the cultural heritage that the traditional ways and the lessons, the values of a people are passed down through the storytelling experience. Stories often talk about how to be in relationship with the natural world, how to live in harmony with the natural world. They speak to tribal traditions and tribal history. They often are teaching children how to be safe, passing down knowledge about ceremonies and practices. And as I mentioned before, they have great entertainment value, so that's a very important part of their value for the community. They are, in a broad sense, sources of education and ways for passing down ways of knowing and understanding the world and oneself and one's community. They portray creation stories and explain different dimensions and aspects of the natural world. And, they help facilitate song and dance and celebration. And as I mentioned before, as far as, the indigenous worldview, the last bullet point here, indigenous ways of knowing. That, refers to just how the storytelling, particularly when it's told in the indigenous language, really reflects the unique way that the tribal members view the world around them, view reality, and interact with that reality. So it's very important to pass on that, that understanding. So as I mentioned before, traditional Native American stories offer vivid narratives that are implicitly spiritual. In addition to the sources listed on the slide we're looking at, traditional stories cover a wide range of topics. So, in addition to there being creation stories, stories about how things came to be, stories that provide information about rituals and protocols, there are also lessons and teachings in the stories that talk about individual transformation, healing stories, stories about history, stories that are designed to, make people laugh and generate, a sense of humor. There are scare stories that are used sometimes to teach important lessons to kids about, consequences of certain behaviors. As I mentioned before, there are, many lessons about right behavior, right living, how to interact with spiritual teachers. So these are some of the areas, some of the topics that we find in stories and in the storytelling tradition. So this is the last slide before we get to just seeing if there are any other, final questions and answers. And before we do this slide, I want to get to Bagareth's question here. And I can read that, I guess. Is it possible to share the PowerPoint to the participants, with the participants, after the webinar is done? And the answer to that is yes. So we will, I presume we have an email list of everybody who's on this webinar, and we can coordinate with Tierra to figure out how to get everyone this PowerPoint. And I would actually even also be willing to share the notes that I have for this PowerPoint, because there's just some additional information, so we can get that to you as well. And I see that there are some questions being typed, so we'll just pause for a moment and see what questions and comments we have come in. And for those of you who aren't typing, take a look at this list of how stories are kept alive, and I just want to see if you can take a guess at what is like the one way stories are kept alive that is like glaringly absent from this list. Just did not, we overlooked this one as far as putting the bullet points together. So there's a response to Bigarath's question from the Institute. So we got a recording of the webinar. It looks like Sofia is typing a question. Okay. Ah, okay. That's a good one, Sofia. It wasn't what I was thinking, but yes, that is missing also. Thank you for sharing that point. Looks like Jenna is typing up something. Song and dance, ceremonies. Okay, yeah, it turns out we missed a lot of stuff on this slide. So you're right, song and dance as well, ceremonies. thank you all for adding to this. Got a couple more, and then I'll just share what I had in mind. Another good addition, workshops for people to learn about storytelling, doing crafts, movies. Wow, okay. This is good. So the examples that Tristan gave were weaving, beading, making regalia. All very good. Okay, well, as I was going over these slides with my colleague Barb Gladue, and she's the one that she developed these slides, and then we kind of discussed them together. And as we got to this slide, we realized that just simply oral storytelling was not on the list here. So that is definitely a principal way that the stories are being kept alive, is through actual oral storytelling. And we just kind of got a chuckle out of that we had kind of overlooked that one. But books, apps, youth, modern technology, you know, for example, I mean, that can be related to movies, you know, and digital storytelling. Of course, elders and caregivers are also key sources for keeping the storytelling tradition alive in communities across Indian country. So before I close and also take some questions, I just wanted to see if there would be anybody who would be interested in sharing a comment around how they've been involved in preserving storytelling, or if there's anybody who would like to share how their community has been involved in preserving storytelling, or has been using storytelling to engage community members and pass on cultural teachings. So I'll just give a couple moments to see if anybody has any comments related to this. See, Sofia is typing something up. Oh, Tristan says, I know that some of our NICWA members have community potluck and story nights at the local longhouse, lodge, or community center. Thanks for sharing that, Tristan. Dottie writes that camps for kids in foster care usually include storytelling. Dottie, thanks for that comment.
Hi, Alton. If you want, we can open up the lines and have folks kind of verbally chime in, if that's okay with you.
Yep, let's do that.
Okay, so everyone, I will take everyone off of mute. If you could use your phone's self-mute button just to minimize any background noise. And if it gets a little too noisy, I'll probably put the mute back on just to let everyone know.
I want to read what Sofia shared. In the 13th District Judicial Court, our surrounding tribal members have been telling stories of their family history in open court. Okay.
Sofia, this is Tristan from NICWA. I was just wondering a little bit more about that. Is that part of like a circle sentencing type of environment, or is that more like, in family court settings, or more like, moral tales to keep teens or whatever on track? I'm just curious about what kind of stories they're telling and what setting. Cool. I see that you said that it's in the ICWA court and it's in the ICWA setting. So, and I see that you said family history stuff. So that's interesting. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophia. I see that she's typing in some more information for us, so I just want to mention again that the lines are unmuted, so if people have comments that they would like to share or questions, please feel free. Sophia writes, we have spent the last year building relationships and learning how to best serve our communities. That's wonderful. Congratulations on that work, Sophia. Dottie is typing up some information. Indian education programs. Vicki writes that where I'm from, we also have round dances, and through our songs and our stories, our ancestors, and through our songs, our stories and our ancestors, and we invite them to join in. That's wonderful. And Janice shares that also during cooking for ceremonies, encouraging the younger people youth to get involved. I just wanted to comment on Vicki's post there. really feel that it speaks a lot to how storytelling and stories really are vehicles to connect and bridge, make a connection between ancestors and the current individuals in a tribe. How she mentioned that she invites the ancestors into the round dances through the songs and stories. That's just fascinating. Really beautiful. Okay, and so on that note, I just had one final comment that I wanted to make, and the kind of, I think Vicky's share kind of leads into it perfectly. Traditional Native American storytelling forms a vital link between tribal ancestors, ancient teachings, traditional culture, and current generations. And, that's just a thought that I'd like to leave you all with. We do have some time for questions if anybody else does have any other comments that they want to make. But I would also just like to remind you that there will be a survey at the end of the webinar, and I'd like to encourage you to participate in that survey if you have the time.
Not my keyboard. Never mind. It's not coming out. Never mind.
Okay, so it looks like we can close at this point. I want to thank you all so much for joining this webinar, and special thanks to Vicki and Tiara and Barb and the other Nicholas staff that supported me in putting this webinar or presenting it for you all. I want to again encourage you to take the survey, and we'll make sure that you can get copies of this webinar and the notes that I have for this presentation. And that is, I think with that, we will close this webinar. Thanks so much, everybody, and enjoy your the rest of your day, and happy holidays and happy